As the Denver Broncos roll into, well, what is basically going to be a long spring and summer, free agency is over. The draft is behind us. Now it's about making your way through whatever virtual OTAs look like and a schedule release that should happen at some point this week. And then there's a wait. There's a significant wait. There's not going to be a lot of free agency movement. The truth of the matter is, if the Broncos do decide to pick anybody up, it's probably going to happen closer to training camp or even after someone else ends up being cut. The Broncos roster as it stands today is probably the way it's going to be throughout May and June, and if not all of July, very close to it. So when you take a look at what the Broncos are now, and the direction that they have gone during their offseason, it's pretty interesting to see where they've gone. Now, when you take a look at the offensive line, obviously the major drawback still, the tackle position is a concern. You don't necessarily know what you have there if you're the Broncos. Garett Bolles is what he is. What he is wasn't enough to get a fifth-year extension. The Broncos chose not to exercise that option, and I think that was the right thing to do. But it does mean that they have a risk here. And that risk is that if even Garett Bolles doesn't play well, Garett Bolles will probably play like Garett Bolles. Garett Bolles has at least been reliable. Juwan James might really be the concern because you don't know if he can get on the field. Now, as long as one of them can, I guess you're going to be okay because you have Elijah Wilkinson. But the Broncos instead leaned all the way on to Drew Lock. When it comes to Drew Lock, he's the basically alpha and omega of the season. The Broncos defense is going to be fine. If they would have gotten maybe a little better at corner, they may be a top 5 defense, but it should be just fine regardless. The question now with Locke is if the Broncos have given him enough. He has enough weapons. Obviously, if you have Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay and Noah Fant and now Alberto and a trio of wide receivers in Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. And at a certain point, look, I know people are down on him, but Deshaun Hamilton as your 4th wide receiver isn't all that bad. So there are plenty of weapons for Drew Lock. So much so that when you take a look at how the Broncos assembled this and what they decided to bet on because of what they decided to pass on the offensive line, is the idea that the Broncos might have talked with Drew Lock or consulted with Drew Lock to make any of these picks. Last week on the drive, he was asked exactly that.
You know, there was a couple conversations here and there. The night before the draft, might have been 2 nights before the draft, just had my weekly call, with Coach Sherm saying, hey, what's up? How's everything going? Just checking in on how my family is and whatnot. And he's like, going into the draft, man, what are you thinking? And I was like, you know what? I think when you look around the league, when teams have speed, they tend to score a lot of points. It's like, you know what? If you can just grab some speed here and there, then I think we're going to be pretty. But other than that, it was pretty hush-hush on what decisions they were going to be making.
Now, I don't know if that qualifies as necessarily Drew Lock being consulted on what the Broncos should do. In fact, I would venture to guess it's not the case. Just kind of asking and checking and touching base. You're not asking your quarterback who's started 5 games for you, no matter how much the Broncos are in, and they are all in on Drew Lock, and justifiably so, in my opinion. But you're not going to consult Drew Lock, not at this point. The only player who I think the Broncos would even consider talking to about what should we do if you wanted to go that route is Von Miller. Now, if Drew Lock quickly turns himself into a top dozen quarterback in this league, I guess you can kick the tires and maybe bounce things back and forth. But the truth of the matter is the Broncos really don't have anyone near Von Miller's class. You're going to have to be the guy that's on the other side of 30, that's been to Pro Bowls over and over again, that's basically a borderline Hall of Fame caliber guy. Those are the people you ask and then actually take into account. In Drew Lock's case, well, the Broncos just happened to be seeing eye to eye on that. I don't think the Broncos had a different plan and were thinking, well, we were going to take a tackle in the second round, but since Pat Shurmur talked to Drew Lock, we'll definitely go get more speed. It didn't work like that. That doesn't really make any sense. Down the road, could that be Drew Lock? Sure. Not now. But in this particular case, the Broncos proved that what they are trying to do is give Drew Lock all those weapons to succeed. And I think this is a very, very good move for the Broncos. I still think they should have taken a tackle. I will argue that. I will argue that till the cows come home. But I do understand that if they didn't think that they were going to be able to find someone as a starter, and I may personally disagree with that, but I get where they're coming from, that you're basically going to say, we're going to run a very, very fast-paced, high-octane offense that is designed to go as quickly as possible and as varied as possible, depending on the amount of potential targets that you have with two different running backs, two different wide receivers, three wide receivers, and two tight ends that are all going to be potential threats to catch the ball. There's a lot of reason to believe that if things will go very, very quick, I mean, you're talking an arena football style offense, I guess, but you could do it. The league is going to this faster paced, spread it out, basically the equivalent in many ways, if you're a basketball fan, of this pace and space shooting threes type of offense you see in the NBA. As athletes continue to get better, as training continues to get better, as film study continues to get better, as tendencies now get plugged into a computer and people have a pretty good idea of what someone's going to do. This makes sense. It doesn't make quite as much sense as just going and getting a lineman who can ensure that one blitzer doesn't wreck your season by hurting Drew Lock. But I get where they're going. And I like the idea of a direction. Whether it's the right direction or wrong direction, we'll find out over the course of the season. I think they're on the right track. I'm not entirely sure that this bet will work, but they had an objective. And they had an objective that was clear, and virtually every single pick in this draft and everybody added in free agency fit into that style. The Broncos are going to try to put the pedal to the metal offensively. They have to. They're just not going to be designed on the offensive line to be a power team that's going to eat the clock and just cram it down other teams' throats. It's not going to be like that. They are planning on giving Drew Lock as close as what he's accustomed to, what he did back in Missouri. This spread offense, get the snap, get it out quick, off you go. What will be intriguing is when you see the Broncos offense in action and see how much of the shotgun ends up being part of this equation. That, to me, maybe is the most intriguing thing. We won't really know until Pat Shurmur develops his offense with these Denver Broncos players. Shurmur has a pretty clear MO. It's gone over the last almost decade where it's rather consistent, and that's not a bad thing. But some reinvention is going to be necessary if the Broncos want to get where they want to get. There's an 11-point per game difference in points scored between the Broncos last year and the Chiefs. I don't expect them to catch all the way up with that. But if they can make up half that gap this year, they could very well be a playoff team.